Hey, Drew here, and I hope that if you have stuck with this adaptation of Stephen King's The Stand on CBS All Access, that you feel that your faith has been somewhat rewarded. I personally feel that way. I came into this episode, the show has gotten better over subsequent weeks, but I have to admit, my CBS All Access subscription ended, and I was questioning whether I wanted to renew it just to continue reviewing this show, and I kind of employed the sunk cost fallacy and decided, okay, I'm going to keep going. And I found this to be a genuinely pleasant episode in terms of how it managed to capture the story and the emotions that it managed to bring to mind. I think the series has finally come to a point where it's at least scratching the surface of the things that have made Stephen King's novel beloved by so many. I think that the thing that's the strongest in this episode is what is the titular aspect, the walk, where we're getting to see these characters on this journey towards their potential doom. And the themes of this story, faith, despite not knowing if your sacrifice is ultimately going to have the effect that you hope it will, the uncertainty of higher power. It's all very interesting stuff, and I feel that the dynamics between the characters are interesting to watch. I feel that the chemistry between the actors was stronger this episode than it has been, in some ways because this was the first episode where we've just gotten to watch a group of characters on a consistent journey together. I think that a lot of this show should have been that if they had followed the book more closely, but they didn't, so a lot of this show has ended up being, random, haphazard scenes with characters. But this was the first scene where we got a really focused series of character interactions, and I thought that it went off very well. I think that from an acting standpoint, I think that the heavy lifting is coming particularly from Greg Kinnear. I think that all of the performances were strong, but him in particular, and I think he adds a very necessary dynamic to the group as this, atheist, ostensibly, who is among the people going out on a leap of faith. And I think that the way that he kind of is the one who's always being logically consistent and just seeing the things that need to be done, I think it's a very compelling character. I have to admit, this is like my least favorite part of the book. Everything in the book had been working for me up till this point, but up till the end, I just found things to be a series of anticlimaxes, and a lot of people will say that's kind of the point, and they're not wrong, but I still object to it. But talking about this episode specifically, I feel, James Marsden, I felt like I've complained about him a lot during this series, but I actually thought his performance was at least adequate this episode. I felt like he did a good job in his final moments, or what he thinks are his final moments, with Glenn as he faces the prospect of his own death with good humor, and just for the first time I feel like really shows what it means to be a leader, in that even though he knows he's dying, he's the one encouraging Larry in particular to not have fear, and reciting that psalm with him and saying, believe it. And that scene with the two of them, I felt like really showed the strength of these two characters and their relationship. I'd also like to shout out Irene Beddard, who I haven't really talked about in my reviews up till now, but just because basically she didn't make that much of an impression. Like, I noticed she was there, but I just never really thought, oh, she's someone I should bring up in my review. But this episode, I thought it was noteworthy that, this character that was originally a male character in the novel, that it didn't throw off the dynamic of the group. The way she portrayed the character, she managed to maintain the camaraderie that these characters had in the group. Again, like to shout out Owen Teague as Harold. I feel that this part of the story is a lot of anticlimaxes, and I personally feel that what happened to Harold this episode, which is slightly different than the book, but and same end result, that he has this motorcycle crash and eventually dies. I feel like this is a very great example of that anticlimax that I'm talking about, where he nothing that happened to him was really resolved. He just sort of accidentally died. And I feel like it's really easy to kill a character off. And a lot harder to actually take the time to resolve their storylines. And I know a lot of people will say, well, that's like real life. Sometimes in real life, you die without having your storylines resolved. And to that, I would say, true, but this is a novel, or it's a TV series based on a novel. So it doesn't have to be like real life. And whenever something like this happens, I feel like it has a lot more to do with the writers being lazy than it has to do with them trying to emulate reality. And I could be wrong about that. Maybe that was all this was, is that King was like, these characters have to die this way because that's what real life is. But to me, no, I feel like it feels very anticlimactic. But again, I feel like Owen Teague's performance here really made a lot of this episode memorable. I feel that, there were these lines he would say that were very vicious and goading to Nadine, but you could see kind of underneath the surface what was going on in Harold's mind, and that, maybe he's acting out in this way, but there's these glimmers of the hurt that he's feeling and his even perhaps guilt for the way he's acting. And I feel that the performance works on a lot of levels and kind of fills in some of the gaps in the writing. This was the most fully fleshed out character in the show, I feel. And to me, it's kind of tragic that he's not going to be in the last 2 episodes. I feel like, you have to follow the story as it was in the novel to a large extent. People would riot if they didn't. But to me, it's like this character was a large part of what made the first 7 episodes of the show work. So to me, to not have him in the last 2 episodes is kind of disappointing. I did think that his final words that, he wrote before dying, before finishing himself off with his pistol, I thought that was very moving in the way that he realized his guilt, but at the same time he kind of wants the credit for being bad. It's a interesting and complex characterization, I feel. I don't know what I think about the choice to have Nadine kill him. I think it kind of explains why they've emphasized the antagonism between these characters throughout, because obviously if you're going to have a character kill another, you kind of have to show their relationship more fully. But there's a lot of other relationships I feel like that were more important that got short shrift. And I just think that Nadine, there's enough going on with her already. We didn't necessarily need her to kill Harold. But again, it's not a huge departure from what happened in the novel, so I can live with it. Talking about Nadine this episode, obviously we got to see her consummate her relationship with Randall Flagg, and we got to see his true face in a very, very disturbing moment. I feel to a large extent that what has motivated this character in the show has always kind of been mysterious to me. Like, why does she feel that the only way that she can be satisfied is by being with Randall Flagg? But to a certain extent, I feel like all the characters that have gravitated to Randall Flagg, it's been mysterious. I feel like, we get glimpses of New Vegas, but I don't think that the showrunners ever really committed to saying what the New Vegas was supposed to represent to these individuals. I think that there were a lot of muddled messages there. I thought that this episode handled Mother Abigail's death pretty well. I think that Whoopi Goldberg hasn't been given enough to do in this show. We haven't really gotten to see enough of her for my preferences, but she delivered her final lines really, really well. It was a powerful speech. I think that you have to believe in the conviction with which she speaks it, or you won't believe that the characters would do what they do this episode and go on this journey to New Vegas. And I think that she delivered it really well and with a ton of conviction. And you can understand why she's had so much authority within this community. I'm kind of surprised they did not follow up on the death of Nick more this episode. I get that Tom Cullen wasn't in this episode, surprisingly as well, and I guess that there's probably a few things that they're waiting till next episode to kind of fill in, but to me I feel like that was still kind of a missed opportunity. Lastly, Trash Can Man during the opening. Some of you say that this is an accurate depiction of what you've seen as far as people with mental disabilities go. I can't say whether it is or not. Sometimes the truth isn't necessarily politically correct, but I feel that all I can see when I look at this character is Ezra Miller giving an over-the-top performance. I knew it was him the minute I heard that ridiculous laugh, but I did like this opening. I think it was kind of chilling, even if you don't know what's going to happen with this warhead that he's pulling up from the ground. And I think it kind of set the tone well for the rest of the episode. Lastly, for what it's worth, I really enjoyed this episode. I think that, is this a good show? I wouldn't say so, no, but I'm enjoying it fairly well. And I think, as I said, that it's at least scratching the surface of what made Stephen King's novel so beloved. But let me know in the comments what you're thinking, what your thoughts are, what I'm wrong about. And if you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, such as the Silence of the Lambs sequel on CBS All Access, Clarice, or The Luminaries on Starz, both of which I'm planning to review at this point, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.